You won't believe what happened to me in my own neighborhood. It all started like any other quiet day. My street was peaceful, the kind of place where everyone keeps to themselves. The kind of neighborhood where the biggest issue might be a barking dog or a stray leaf in someone's yard. But that calm was about to get shattered by someone no one could ignore, a real-life Karen from the Homeowners Association. This wasn't just any Karen. She was the type who believed the rules only applied to other people, and that her word was law. She had this sharp attitude, the kind that made neighbors avoid eye contact when she was around. You know the type. Loud, demanding, always making scenes over the smallest things. But what she did next, that's what truly blew my mind. One afternoon, I got a message from the HOA about a serious concern. I thought it might be a routine notice or some minor complaint. I had no idea that Karen had already decided she wanted my house. Yes, my actual home, for her sister. Can you imagine? She demanded that I just hand over my keys because apparently, her sister deserved the place more than I did. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe a misunderstanding. But no, Karen was dead serious. She showed up at my door, standing there like she owned the place. She wasn't subtle about it. Her tone was sharp, almost arrogant, as if she believed she had the authority to take my home away. She said her sister needed a better place, and since the HOA was in charge, she expected me to just comply. I was stunned. How could someone be so bold? So entitled? The audacity to think they could just demand someone else's home like it was theirs to give away. I tried to stay calm, told her politely that my home wasn't for sale or rent, but she wasn't having it. Karen kept pushing, raising her voice, making wild claims about rules and favoritism, acting like she was above the law. What shocked me even more was how many neighbors seemed to quietly agree with her or at least didn't stand up for me. The HOA had some serious influence around here, and Karen was their loudest voice. It felt like I was up against a wall, like the whole neighborhood was ready to side with her just because she had that kind of power. Every day after that, things got worse. Karen didn't just stop at demanding my house. She started sending letters, reports, and even threats. She claimed I was violating HOA rules, things I didn't even know existed. She made it sound like I was a troublemaker, someone who didn't belong in this community. But all I wanted was to live in peace in the home I had worked hard to get. The tension was real. Every encounter with her felt like a battle. The way she looked at me, the smug smile, like she already had me defeated. But deep down, I knew I couldn't just let her steamroll me. I had to find a way to fight back. But how? That was the question I kept asking myself. What made this situation even more intense was the fact that no one expected the twist that was coming. Karen had no idea who I really was, and I kept that secret close. Behind the scenes, I wasn't just a homeowner, I was the judge assigned to handle the eviction case against her. And trust me, that was going to turn the tables in ways she never imagined. But before all that could play out, I had to survive the storm Karen was creating. Every day felt like walking on eggshells. I wondered how far she would go, what other tricks she had up her sleeve, and if the neighborhood would finally see who was really in the right. This wasn't just a story about a demanding HOA member. It was about standing your ground when everything seems against you. About the unexpected power you might have, and how sometimes, people get a reality check they desperately need. So, if you think you've heard it all about HOA drama, wait until you hear what happened next. This was about to get real. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was the kind of person who made sure everyone knew she ran the show. From the moment I met her, her attitude was impossible to ignore. She had this way of speaking like she was entitled to everything, like the whole neighborhood owed her something. You know those people who act like they're the king or queen of their little world? That was Karen. She wasn't shy about showing off her power either. Whenever she walked around the neighborhood, she carried herself with that look, a mix of arrogance and control. And the way she talked about the HOA was like it was her personal kingdom. She would brag about how she had connections and influence, and that if anyone crossed her, there would be consequences. When she started demanding my house for her sister, it was no surprise to see how forceful she became. She didn't just send polite messages or hints. No, she showed up in person, storming onto my property like she owned the place. Her eyes were cold and her voice sharp as a knife. She told me her sister was in desperate need of a home, and since the HOA had rules about who could live where, she expected me to cooperate. What really got under my skin was how she acted like she was doing me a favor. Like I should feel lucky that her sister was interested in my home. It was as if the world owed her family something special, and I was supposed to just hand it over without question. Karen's demands didn't stop at words. She began showing up at HOA meetings, pushing for my eviction. She told anyone who would listen that I was a problem, that I didn't follow the rules, and that the neighborhood would be better off without me. It was like she was building a case, piece by piece, trying to turn everyone against me. She wasn't subtle. Not at all. One time she even left a note on my door, something snide and threatening, warning me that if I didn't vacate she would make sure the law was on her side. I read it twice just to make sure it wasn't some mistake. But no, Karen meant business. Neighbors who once nodded hello suddenly avoided me. Some whispered when she walked by, clearly on her side. The HOA meetings became tense, full of people who sided with Karen's version of the story. I realized quickly that Karen wasn't just a problem for me, she was a problem for the entire neighborhood, a force of chaos hiding behind HOA rules. The more she pushed, the more I saw her true colors. She didn't care about rules or fairness. She only cared about power. The way she twisted conversations, spread rumors, and pressured people was exhausting. It was clear she thought the rules were just tools to get what she wanted, not guidelines to follow. And her sister? I never even met her, but Karen talked about her like she was some helpless victim who deserved my home more than I did. It was all part of Karen's plan, paint her sister as the innocent one and me as the villain. But I wasn't going anywhere without a fight. Every time I tried to reason with Karen or explain my side, she cut me off. Her tone would sharpen, and her demands would grow louder. It was like talking to a wall that thought it could break me down with sheer force. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about Karen's obsession with control. She wanted to prove that she could get whatever she wanted, no matter who she hurt in the process. And for a while it looked like she might succeed. But what Karen didn't know was that she was about to face a surprise that would change everything. She had no idea that I was the judge who would decide the fate of her eviction. The very person she thought was powerless was the one holding the cards. And that's when the real game began. The tension between Karen and me kept building every single day. It wasn't just a simple disagreement anymore, it had turned into a full-blown battle. Every encounter felt like walking into a storm, with Karen throwing accusations and threats like they were weapons. She pushed the limits, testing how far she could go before I'd finally snap or give in. She started calling the HOA office constantly, complaining about me. She claimed I was violating rules that barely existed, making up reasons just to try and force me out. It was like she was trying to rewrite the book on what was allowed and what wasn't, all so she could claim my house for her sister. When she showed up at neighborhood meetings, the room grew cold. She had this way of commanding attention, like a spotlight that forced everyone to listen. She'd talk over people, interrupt anyone who tried to defend me, and paint me as the villain. Some neighbors began to look at me with suspicion, wondering if maybe Karen had a point. She wasn't afraid to escalate things either. One day she had a crew come by to inspect my property, claiming there were violations. It was clear they were acting on her orders. They poked around, took photos, and wrote up reports. But when I looked into it, I found the claims were flimsy at best. Karen even went so far as to file formal complaints against me, hoping the HOA board would take her side. She used every trick in the book, bending the truth, exaggerating small issues, and making it seem like I was a danger to the neighborhood's harmony. The worst part was how personal it got. Karen didn't just want my house, she wanted to ruin me. She whispered rumors, told people stories that weren't true, and made it clear she wanted me out at any cost. Every phone call, every message carried that threat, the idea that she could destroy my peace and stability. Through all this, I stayed calm on the outside. I knew getting angry or reacting would only give her more fuel. But inside I was stewing. How could one person have so much power? How could the HOA system be used like this to bully someone? I started gathering evidence, documenting everything Karen did. Every call, every letter, every meeting. I knew I needed proof because if this was going to a legal fight, I had to be ready. It was exhausting, but I couldn't afford to let her win. Meanwhile, Karen's arrogance grew. She was convinced she had me backed into a corner. She acted like victory was already hers, like I was the one who would be kicked out, not her. It was almost amusing if it weren't so serious. At the same time, the neighborhood's mood shifted. Some people started whispering behind Karen's back, uncomfortable with how aggressive she was being. A few neighbors quietly reached out to me, offering support or advice. But many still stayed silent, afraid of crossing her. Then there were the threats, subtle but clear. A message left on my voicemail warning me to watch my back. A note slipped under my door saying I should leave before it gets worse. Karen didn't have to say it directly. The message was loud and clear. Despite the pressure, I reminded myself of one important fact. I was not powerless. I wasn't just some homeowner stuck in a fight with a bully. I had a voice, a position, and a plan. But Karen had no clue about that yet. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. And that ignorance was about to cost her everything. The day Karen found out who I really was is a day I'll never forget. Up until then she acted like she had all the power. She walked around with that smug look, convinced I was just some homeowner she could bully into submission. But she had no idea the truth, that I was the judge assigned to her eviction case. It started like any other day. I got a call from the HOA office. Karen had demanded an urgent meeting. She wanted to discuss my eviction and make sure everything was moving quickly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, trying to push things faster, unaware that the person on the other side of this fight was the one who controlled the final decision. When she showed up for the meeting, she had that usual confident swagger. She didn't suspect a thing. She was ready to throw more accusations, more demands. But this time I had something different planned. I let her talk, letting her feel in control for a moment. Then, casually, I revealed my identity. Her face went from confident to shocked in a heartbeat. You could see it, the disbelief, the sudden realization that she had been playing a dangerous game. For a moment there was silence. Then Karen stammered, trying to recover, trying to regain some of that control she always wielded. But it was gone. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was the judge who had the power to decide her fate. She looked at me like she'd been caught in a trap. All her schemes, her demands, her threats suddenly seemed foolish. It was a complete shift in the dynamic. The power she thought she had was now in my hands. I explained to her clearly that the eviction case was serious. The HOA rules had been broken, and the evidence was strong. Her attempts to force me out by bullying and false claims would not work. The law would decide, not her threats. Karen's usual bravado cracked. She realized she couldn't intimidate me anymore. No more sneaky complaints or hidden threats. The game had changed and she was on the losing side. What was most satisfying was seeing her struggle to maintain composure. She tried to argue, tried to plead for some kind of leniency for her sister. But the facts were clear. The eviction was justified and there was no room for favoritism. The meeting ended with Karen storming out, her face red with frustration. The neighborhood had never seen her like that, vulnerable, powerless. It was a reminder that even the loudest voices can be silenced when the truth comes out. After that day things started to shift fast. The HOA moved forward with the eviction process, and Karen's influence began to fade. People who had been afraid to speak up now felt empowered to stand against her bullying. But what really stuck with me was how blind Karen was to her own downfall. She had no idea who I was, no idea that I was the one with the final say. It was like she was so focused on forcing her will that she didn't stop to think about who she was messing with. This twist wasn't just a personal victory, it was a lesson in power and justice. Sometimes the person you least expect holds all the cards. And sometimes the biggest bully gets knocked down by the quietest voice. But this wasn't the end. There was still more to come. Once Karen realized the game had changed, she tried everything to turn the tables. But the truth was already out, and the community started to see her in a new light. The very power she had wielded so freely was slipping through her fingers, and you could sense her desperation growing. She began to backtrack, suddenly acting like the victim. In HOA meetings, she softened her tone, trying to win sympathy by talking about how hard things had been for her sister. But most people weren't buying it anymore. The fear that once silenced neighbors was turning into quiet conversations behind closed doors, people questioning her motives and her methods. Meanwhile, the eviction process moved steadily forward. The evidence I had collected, combined with the official reports, made the case clear. Karen's attempts to bully and manipulate were documented, and the HOA board had no choice but to act. The pressure she had applied only made it easier to prove the pattern of harassment and rule-breaking. Karen's sister, the reason for all this chaos, never showed up to defend herself. It was as if she disappeared into the background, while Karen took the spotlight, making claims and demands on her behalf. The contrast was striking, the silent sister versus the loud, aggressive Karen who tried to push everyone around. The more the eviction process progressed, the more Karen's confidence seemed to drain. Her usual sharp words were replaced by silence or weak protests. Even some of her closest supporters began to distance themselves, unwilling to be part of the drama anymore. Around the neighborhood, people started to feel a shift. The heavy tension that had hung over the community began to lift. It was like a weight was being removed, and the peace that had been stolen was slowly coming back. Neighbors who had once felt afraid to speak up started to share their stories of feeling bullied or controlled by Karen and the HOA's harsh tactics. In private conversations, people thanked me for standing firm. They said it took courage to face down someone like Karen, someone who thought she was untouchable. But it wasn't just about courage, it was about knowing your rights and refusing to be intimidated. What surprised me was how many people had quietly suffered under Karen's rule but were too scared to do anything. This situation showed me how important it is to have someone willing to stand up, especially when power is being abused. Even after the eviction notice was officially delivered, Karen kept trying to fight back. She filed last-minute appeals and tried to find loopholes. But the legal process was clear, and with the evidence in hand, there was no escaping the consequences. Throughout it all, I stayed professional, making sure every decision was fair and based on facts. This wasn't about personal revenge, it was about justice. The HOA had rules for a reason and no one was above those rules. The neighborhood began to heal. People started to reconnect without fear of Karen's interference. Gardens got tended to again, porch lights stayed on, and the usual sounds of children playing returned. It was a quiet victory but a powerful one. This whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. It reminded me that sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who holds the most power, and that justice doesn't always look the way you expect. But just when it seemed like the storm had passed, there was still one last surprise waiting around the corner.